DLSS 4.5 dynamic multi-frame generation with up to 6x frame gen now releases today. Now, what you're looking at is footage that I recorded earlier because I got review access to this driver so that I could have a review out when it launches. And so that's what you're seeing today is my review of this technology. And I've got to say that my overall take is this does what frame gen does even better, but frame gen is still not a magic fix for low overall performance. And that's what I'm showing you here is that this is coming from a base frame rate of below 30 FPS, but my FPS counter says 150. Yeah, but the PC latency is still like 100 milliseconds, and you can see underneath the targeting reticle and things especially that some of the frame gen gets sort of messed up. So this is not a great experience despite having 150 FPS. So frame gen is still not a fix for a bad performance. Frame generation is a motion smoothing technology. The video of this looks very smooth because it is getting 150 frames per second to the monitor. Now, you're also watching a fixed FPS YouTube video that is 60 FPS, so I can't really show you what it looks like in person on a high refresh rate variable refresh rate display. What I can show you is the underlying experience. I just turned frame gen off, and look, I got hit by a car. That's what this experience feels like because I'm actually getting less than 30 FPS. We can see that I'm kind of bouncing around the mid to upper 20s here. And again, PC latency is still like 100 milliseconds of PC latency here, and this is with frame generation off. Now, there's even maybe some argument that using frame gen on, even from this low of a base frame rate, could be preferable for some people to having it off. However, the main point is that frame generation is not increased performance, it is increased motion fluidity, and so we need to review it according to that. And I do think that the new dynamic mode does that even better, but I do have some nitpicky things about it that I think could maybe be improved. More on that in a second. But as we're talking about new GPU tech, we need to acknowledge the elephant in the room, which is that PC hardware prices have gone absolutely insane with all the AI data centers buying everything up. So there's two main strategies for improving your situation as you shop for a new PC. One is sell your old hardware to fund your upgrade, which you can do at Jawa.gg. There is two main options here. One is become a Jawa seller, set your own prices, create your own listings. And another option is the maximum convenience route where you click the get an instant offer button and Jawa will give you an instant offer for your GPU or your CPU. Now, also the other main strategy here is don't buy new. So new prices are the ones being hit the most by these increases in AI data centers buying up all the supply of RAM and SSDs. Now it hits the used market too, but not as quickly and not as hard. So you'll still get the better deals on the used market, and Jawa.gg has you covered there as well, whether you're buying individual components or entire pre-built systems. And I've noticed a lot of stuff where, like, guys, SSD prices have gone insane on the new market, so has RAM, but you can buy an entire pre-built system that already has the RAM and the SSD, and the prices haven't gone as insane as they have on the new market. And you can find exactly the PC that you're looking for. Shop for performance in specific games at specific resolutions or specific parts that you want, or even the theme of the build so that it matches your room. All of that, everything's covered. Again, you can buy individual parts as well. Turn your old gear into extra cash. There's great reviews, etc. And you can get $10 off your first purchase using code Owen10. And a huge thank you to Jawa for sponsoring this part of today's video. Follow the link in the video description and or pinned comment to check out Jawa. Okay, so how do you actually review dynamic multi-frame generation with up to 6x frame generation? So I think what I would say is we have to decide, okay, so what do we want frame generation to do? So frame generation, like I said, is not a performance technology. It doesn't take a bad experience like the one I'm showing you here and make it a good experience. But if you already have a good base frame rate, so the game already feels responsive, you can then improve the motion fluidity on your high refresh rate display to have a better experience when it comes to the what you're seeing on your display, even if the game doesn't feel more responsive. So I just switched to DLSS Super Resolution at the performance mode. Previously, I was running at a native 4K, and now without any frame generation, you can see the MFG is at 1x, meaning that we're not multiplying the frame rate with the frame gen. I'm getting kind of a mid to upper 70 FPS range, and my PCL, that's the PC latency, is below 50 milliseconds. Now, FrameGen's hard to review because everybody has a different base frame rate that they're happy with, a different PC latency that they're happy with, and also don't confuse PC latency with frame time. Those are completely different things. Now, I find that if I'm under 50 milliseconds of PC latency in a single player game, I'm pretty happy. And if I'm over 60 FPS, I'm pretty happy. So you might be like, then what's the point of frame generation, right? Well, the idea is then to get an even better experience by, if you have a high refresh rate display, kicking that on. Now, you'll see that DLSS Frame Gen, I'm turning it on and it says 2x mode, but I'm using the NVIDIA app to override this. So that's how you enable this, is you go to the NVIDIA app, and now in compatible games, you can set it to dynamic multi-frame gen. And you can also cap it to certain refresh rates. It'll default to your monitor's maximum refresh rate. Mine is 240, and I just left it at monitor's max refresh rate. But you can also set lower targets. And then you can also say, allow the multi-frame gen to go all the way up to 6x, but you could also cap it lower. If you're like, I just hate 6x, don't do that. You could cap it to 3x or 4x if you prefer. So I've allowed it to go up to 6x if needed, but because my base frame rate's already pretty good here, it doesn't usually need to. You can see MFG right now is at 4x, but earlier when I was like staring down at the ground, it only needed to go to 3x. So it'll dynamically adjust how many generated frames are happening in between the two traditionally rendered frames or real frames, whatever you want to call them. And then we get the output FPS. Now, this brings me to my first nitpick. Do you notice that my output FPS is above 240? My monitor's max refresh rate is 240. And when you go above your monitor's max refresh rate, you can see little bits of judder and occasionally screen tearing, even if you have G-Sync turned on. Now here I'm staring at a wall to notice that it did dynamically adjust down to 3x when it was easier to render, so the dynamic stuff is working. But like I said, like right now it's showing like 260 FPS. Now when it's close to my 240, I didn't notice a lot of issues going above, but in person I could tell that, when it does go above 240, especially by very much, I do feel like the experience is worse than when it's strictly below. So that's my first nitpick here, is I would like it to more strictly stay below my monitor's max refresh rate when I set it to target my monitor's max refresh rate. Now that being said, you can set a custom frame rate target. Now I'm not showing that here in the footage, but if I, target 200 FPS, then I notice it doesn't overshoot as often. So that's gonna be like, just kind of maybe a useful thing for using this is you don't have to target your monitor's max refresh rate. Also, if you have a super high refresh rate display like 500 hertz, that might always put you into 6x frame gen mode, which you might not want to use. So you could also cap it to a lower MFG number, or you could just cap to a lower frame rate target. I think some people will end up preferring that. Now, the other issue that I run into is overall, the transitions between the frame gen multipliers, like between 3x and 4x, I didn't notice a big issue. But when it jumps between 1x and 2x, which is what I'm showing you here, I could feel a bigger difference in what was happening. Because if you think about that, going from 1x, which is no frame gen, which by the way, I'm gonna say that I think it's great that this has that option. So when you turn on dynamic multi-frame gen, it's possible that if you're already getting very close to your monitor's max refresh rate or whatever frame rate target you set, the frame gen will just usually be turned off. And it'll only kick on if you're in a super hard to play scene of your game, where then it's actually needed. Like here I'm staring at a wall, MFG is at 1x because I'm already close to my monitor's 240 hertz. But then if I do something harder to render, it might then need to kick on some frame gen to kind of save the day here, right? So that's the idea behind it. So when I'm no longer staring at a wall, then it might need the 2x frame gen. But my issue, like I said, is going from 1x to 2x is actually a big difference, whereas going from like 3x to 4x isn't. And I can feel it. Also notice when it goes to 2x, I'm going over 300 FPS at times here. So I noticed that just if I'm close to 240 hertz, and that's my target, it kind of likes to go to 1x and then sometimes jump to 2x, and I find that transition noticeable. And also, when it jumps to 2x, sometimes it's then well over 300 FPS on my 240 hertz display, and that's where I notice a little bit of that less smooth than when I'm under my refresh rate. Honestly, when it was hitting like 250, I would barely notice it at all. It wasn't a big deal. When it was jumping to like 330 on a 240 hertz display briefly, that's where I noticed a reduction to the smoothness at the same time as there's like a change-ish to just the feel of the game as that kicks on. And I would say that overall, that was one of my worst experiences with this. It still wasn't terrible, and I love that it goes down to 1x, but that's where I found the transition more noticeable, is when it's from 1x to 2x. Once it's already at 2x, the transition to 3x or from 3x to 4x, those weren't very noticeable, and I thought overall it worked pretty well. So those are my kind of minor nitpicks, but also I'm gonna mention that there's one additional kind of added bonus here, which will be also good news for people who don't have a 50 series GPU, because to be clear, while DLSS 4.5 upscaling is supported all the way down to the 20 series, multi-frame gen is only supported on the 50 series, and that's also the case for this new version of it. So this is still 50 series only. Now the 40 series supports 2x frame gen, so it doesn't have this like dynamic 6x mode, but the 40 series does have access to a new frame generation model, preset B. So that's kind of an interesting thing that was added here is preset B is allowing the DLSS frame generation algorithm to have more information about UI elements. So in games that can expose the UI depth information to the DLSS algorithm, which is not every game. It's actually a fairly small list of games right now, although not nothing. There's a lot of popular titles on there. In those games, the DLSS algorithm should now be able to do a better job of dealing with HUD elements than they might have been doing previously. And that preset B, I have confirmed with NVIDIA, is compatible with the 40 series GPUs. So 40 series GPUs, you're not getting the dynamic multi-frame gen at 6x here, but you are getting preset B, which in certain games could improve the UI with frame generation, get less artifacts because it has access to the depth buffer for the UI. So that's good news for the 40 series. So that brings me to my last complaint here, which is just that it would be kind of nice if the 20 and 30 series GPUs did get some sort of a frame gen update, because when frame generation was first launched with NVIDIA's 40 series GPUs, their reason for it being a 40 series exclusive was because they had access to better optical flow hardware, which was required for doing the frame generation. However, with updates to the newer versions of FrameGen, NVIDIA has explained that they are now doing the frame generation optical flow analysis through like machine learning on the tensor cores. Now, the 20 and 30 series GPUs have tensor cores with a good amount of acceleration there. So that kind of begs the question, could the current version of frame generation, even if it's not multi-frame generation or the dynamic frame generation, could at least a basic 2x frame gen DLSS be supported on 20 and 30 series GPUs? And it feels like if they're doing it through the tensor cores for the optical flow analysis, that perhaps that could be supported. Common sense seems to say it could be, and so it would be nice to get that update. So overall, what's my review of the frame generation? Main thing is, frame generation is still not a magic fix, so even if you use 6x frame gen to get 150 FPS from a 25 FPS baseline, it's not a great experience. Although I was honestly surprised that I still liked the frame gen on better than playing at the actual 20-ish FPS. I actually did prefer it on. That was interesting. It didn't have a huge latency hit or compared to just playing with it off. But in general, I just wouldn't want to play from that low of a base frame rate. So it's still best when you're coming from a decent base experience. So it's still kind of a win more feature, right? That was my initial review of FrameGen when it first launched, is it's a win more feature. You already need to be in a winning position for it to be a great experience. And that's still its best use case. But if viewed as a motion smoothing technology to take advantage of high refresh rate displays, allowing it to work in a dynamic mode, which makes it easier to just set it and forget it. You target a certain frame rate, and if your game's in a hard to demand area, it reaches that. And it can adjust on the fly as needed, and that mostly works pretty well. I think that this improves that way of looking at frame gen, which I think is the right way of looking at frame gen. It smooths out your frame rate to better take advantage of your high refresh rate display, and this does a better job of that than it did before. The small nitpicks are, I feel like jumping from 1x to 2x doesn't feel great, although I am glad it allows it to go down to 1x. Especially when the 2x jumps to way above my monitor's max refresh rate, which I didn't feel like was a great experience either. So that's kind of my little nitpicks, and I wish it would do a better job of strictly sticking to below my monitor's max refresh rate. But like I said, you could set lower frame rate targets than your monitor's max refresh rate to help smooth that out. So that's the overall thoughts. Like I said, other than the I wish we'd get some more support on older GPUs. That would be nice and everything. Also, just some technical notes if you're like, so how am I getting these stats and all that? This is NVIDIA's Frame View, which is kind of their forked version of PresentMon, I think. But which can show the multi-frame gen. However, in NVIDIA's overlay, you actually can also monitor the frame gen stuff. So in the NVIDIA overlay, you can go to your statistics stuff, which you do with Alt-R, but you can open up the overlay with Alt-Z, go to the statistics, and you can monitor the multi-frame gen. You can also monitor the DLSS overrides to make sure that it's actually applying. So you can monitor all of that through the NVIDIA app. And once again, just a reminder that the footage that you're seeing here is not what you would see in person. That's just a technical limit to YouTube. You're watching a fixed 60 hertz video of a well above 60 FPS experience that was played in person on a variable refresh rate display. So I really can't communicate in video what this feels like other than describing it to you. The video doesn't really capture the in-person experience other than the metrics like PC latency and FPS and things like that. So, and some of the image quality artifacts, although those appear different in person as well because you're seeing a higher refresh rate in person. Anyway, so that's what I've got for you guys today. I hope you guys found the video useful and or interesting. Obviously, it's just a free update if you have a compatible GPU, so you can try it out, and you can just turn it off if you don't like it anyway. So there's always that. I've still found with frame generation that there's certain games where I feel like it improves the experience and some games where I don't, because I find the image quality artifacts to be more noticeable in some games than others. And in some games, I just don't need it to hit a super high refresh rate anyway. So there's that, and FrameGen also still uses a bit more VRAM than not, so it's still harder to make work on 8GB cards. So there's all the usual FrameGen stuff. But overall, I feel like this does the FrameGen thing better than we did before. It's with a few little caveats and nitpicks. Hope you guys found it useful and or interesting, and you have an excellent day.